So my name is Cody Arkland. I'm a technical marketing architect with VMware's Cloud Management Business Unit. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about application delivery with pipelines in VMware CodeStream, which is one of our services in Cloud Automation Services. We wrapped up the previous portion of this in our Service Broker product talking about catalog. And we've already talked a little bit about blueprinting and building projects out and how we deliver kind of the traditional infrastructure use case. But something that's happening more often now, and especially it's part of the whole, and Vipul hinted at this earlier in today when he talked about the DevOps concept. No one can sell you a DevOps product. DevOps is a series of a series of practices and almost a series of attitudes, the way you approach a problem. And you can absolutely buy a product that's aligned to DevOps concepts. But if someone says, I have a DevOps provisioning tool for you, you should probably not listen to that. Just fun feedback. CodeStream is something that we do our best to align to DevOps concepts. And it started off, has anyone in the room used CodeStream 2.0 before? Not surprising. CodeStream 2.0 it had its heart in the right spot, but there was some challenges in the adoption and the utilization of it. It was a true pipelining tool, and it was designed to do pipelines. And we used it extensively inside VMware to build out our environments. CodeStream, what we call 3, or the new version of CodeStream that's in Cloud Automation Services, is designed to be a very, very quick to use, very quick to get started, very similar theme to everything else, API-backed pipelining platform that's not just focused on application delivery, but also infrastructure delivery. And when I think about infrastructure pipelines, my favorite example is when I was an admin, we would do monthly updates on our vSphere templates. Security patches. I worked for a major utility, and it was one of those audit thing checkboxes to say, hey, every month I update my templates with security patches, and by doing that, we checked the box and didn't have to worry about that. But it was a pretty rough process. No matter how hard I tried to automate that using tools, environment tools like Packer and such, like I still had to deploy the image, boot it up, verify that everything was done, verify that all the settings checked. And normally I'm somebody who's not a fan of verification-based automation, where you automate something and have to verify it. But for certain systems in a utility company, I had to go in and validate those things, and it was a pain. When I think of infrastructure pipelines, I think of how I can build a pipeline that does that for me. And it's how can I make pipelines relevant to the vSphere administrators? Because developers have been using pipelines for quite some time already. Right? Developers understand the idea of, hey, I'm going to build something. I'm going to have a pipeline build this in Node, and I'm going to run my unit tests against it. I'm going to run my application tests. I'm going to do a load test. I'm going to have that all be in a pipeline, and I'm going to get notified with the results. That's a common thing for developer teams to do. But it's not so common for the vAdmins of the world to do. We'll do it in things like PowerShell. We'll write a big old PowerShell script that we store and we execute, and that's how we build our systems. Or we'll do it as kind of chunked out automation, where I have my PowerShell script that builds my machine, and then I have my separate one that goes out to DNS and does stuff. I want to use CodeStream to bring the concept of infrastructure pipelining. And when you think about what that is, all a pipeline is a sequential execution engine. That's a big word. All it is a way of executing things step by step. So when I switch over into CodeStream now, I'm going to jump into a pipeline I wrote that's called vSphere Template Builder. It's very basic. I haven't added any of the unit tests to this yet. But what this pipeline does is it goes out and it deploys a template, or deploys a blueprint in Cloud Assembly that spins up, pulls down Packer from HashiCorp, builds me a Ubuntu image. It uses Git, so it pulls down all my information from Git based on my template, like all of the config files for my template, runs that builder, deploys it into my environment, converts it to a template. I can then use the APIs, and I have this working in my staging environment. I just don't have it in here. I can then use the APIs to update CAS with that new template and say my new image mapping uses this template. I can then deploy that and test all of the things that I need to ensure there. Is my SSH set up right? Did my keys get cleared out? That's the kind of things when I talk about infrastructure pipelines that I want you guys to walk away thinking about, is the idea of a pipeline that drives the things that you would do as an infrastructure administrator when you build out systems and when you test systems. The amount of time I spent as an admin testing out vSphere deployments after they finish, like if I deployed an application, installed a web server, and then testing the web server, all of that stuff should be pipelines. We should be approaching that as pipelines, and it doesn't have to be a pipeline that drives something like a Jenkins build or a Docker deploy. This could be a vSphere or a vSphere template deploying a Cloud Assembly blueprint and running test cases against that. That was a long speech, but it's something that I'm kind of passionate about. So this will actually functionally go out and build me my template. And I share this with people in the field so that when they get people set up on CAS, they can install this pipeline and they can build their CAS blueprint right out of the gate. So it installs things like Cloud Init on it automatically, configures it in the little ways to just be more efficient with CAS. So it's a helpful thing. So let's take a look at something a little bit more cloud native-y. I have this pipeline here that's called TFD19 web app, and this is a pipeline that will run against a Kubernetes cluster, hence why I put the pretty little Kubernetes picture on it. CodeStream has this concept of endpoints, right? So you create these endpoints that you're going to execute pipeline stuff against. If I hit one of these tasks, and I'll delete this in a moment, but you can see all of the different types of jobs that can be run. You can see Jenkins in that list, Kubernetes, Pivotal Cloud Foundry. We can run nested pipelines. We do a ton of nested pipelines inside of VMware. So we'll have a master pipeline for CodeStream, and then the different services have their own pipelines inside of that master pipeline. So nested pipelines are definitely a thing. Remote REST calls, remote SSH. You can notice the interesting thing about this is that CodeStream has a lot of things that are centered around common automation tools. Right? So if you wanted to be able to remotely hit something like a Infoblox and do that DNS reservation that we talked about before, you could very easily use the REST plugin to accomplish that. If you wanted to be able to hit something I used to do with Orchestrator back in the day was I'd hit a storage switch via SSH and apply a bunch of storage zoning commands when I'd bring new storage on. That could all be done through the platform, and that, Alistair, to your question before, things like the SSH task and the REST task can absolutely be piped through the cloud proxy and hit stuff locally. So if you have the Infoblox, DNS is always my favorite one because it's always DNS. You could route that call through the cloud proxy and do a REST call, remote SSH call, so on and so forth. So this pipeline goes out onto Cloud PKS, to the previous question, and deploys this pipeline out. And that's cool, right? If I go in, I hit run, it's going to go out and it's going to start that pipeline. I can come in, I can look at executions, I can see previous failures when I was sitting over in the corner trying to hack together this last little part of my demo that I wanted to show. You can see my failures in there. I can come in, I can see the process that it took, all the stages that took place. This is a more basic pipeline. That's focused really on what I call CD, the continuous deployment aspect of it, or continuous delivery, deployment, delivery, whatever. But it doesn't necessarily do the build aspect of it. I have this pipeline here that handles that build aspect too. And what this does, and I'm going to step into the light even though I wasn't supposed to, over these three objects, it will actually build out the 3 Docker containers that are a part of this application that I wrote. So it'll go through sequentially, build those out as part of the CI task. Simple bash script in here that goes out, builds that, pushes it into my on-prem Harbor repo. So I run VMware Harbor at home. So it builds those 3 containers, pushes it, and then in Kubernetes goes out and steps through an actual deployment. I have a pipeline that uses the PKS deployment capability in Cloud Assembly, executes that blueprint, then goes in over API and adds the cluster to CodeStream, and then updates this pipeline with that new cluster. So if I want to be able to test out new clusters, new applications, it's very easy for me to run that pipeline and have it update my existing pipelines with that new cluster if I want to. This goes through, deploys the entire service. It waits for the load balancer to come up, notifies me on Slack, hey, your stuff's done, go play with it. and then it sits in an approval state waiting for me to approve the destruction, and then wipes it out. It's like my demo in a box. So that first one finished. So I can come in here, I can hit the exposed load balancer. If I hit this, please work. All right. So that's cool, right? But it's pipelining. There's not anything super special about that. So we're going to do a little bit of live demo action of something that's not pre-set up. We're going to hope that I don't fail at it. I believe that most people want to interact against Git or against some form of an external source control system. Most people want their blueprints to be stored there. They want their application content to be there. Something that I tell customers about CAS is that we built CAS to help you get back to the things that matter in your job, so you're not having to spend all this time building an automation platform. In the context of this, I want people to get back to what matters to them most from a code perspective, and that's checking code into Git. Talk to a developer. The thing that matters most to a developer is, I just want to check my code in. I want it to go build my thing. I don't want to know what it's doing. I just want to be told when it's done on Slack or a text message or a Raven or a yellow sticky something. I just want to find out that it's been deployed. I don't want to have to worry about getting it out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to set up a webhook binding in CodeStream to the repo for the Tech Field Day demo application. And we're going to make a small change to that application and show how it actually deploys into the platform. And at that point, you'll be able to actually go in, and if you had access to this repo, you could commit a change to it and have it automatically update that application. So in order to do that, there's a couple things that are in play. We already have our Kubernetes cluster in place. I'm going to let this one destroy the old application. So say we were going to, the story here being, hey, the Tech Field Day website that Cody built is ugly and boring. We're going to update this and make it mo better. So I've approved that to destroy. And this is a little bit backwards because typically you do what's called like a blue-green deployment or a canary build where you replace the existing deployment with a new one. We're not going to spend the time to set that up today. We're just going to do a net new deployment. I have that application in Git already. So if I come up here and I hit our Git repo and I change this to TFD demo, there it is. The application's in here already. Conveniently enough, I left the security issue there so I can show that, fixing that later, and how we could actually trigger a new build even off of something like a security issue being fixed, which is, one would think, would be pretty useful. So I already have my endpoint for my cloud PKS environment set up, so I don't have to worry about getting a PKS cluster in place. What I do need, though, is I do need a Git endpoint. I have the Git endpoint set up for other repos, but I don't have it set up for this one. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to do a new endpoint. I'm going to choose my lab. And I'm going to choose not Kubernetes. I'm going to choose Git. I have a number of different types of Git. I have GitHub, GitHub Enterprise, GitLab, GitLab Enterprise, Bitbucket, and Bitbucket Enterprise. All available as repos that I can use. I'm storing in GitHub for this one, so I'm going to store that there. I'm going to plug in my URL, which is github.com, Cody TFD demo. We're going to use the master branch because I'm a pro and I commit to master. And also because I'm security focused, I'll use username and password. We'll accept that. That was just the cert being accepted. Oh, got to name it. Awesome. So we've built our endpoint now. And we already have a pipeline that's going to deploy the application. So we can actually go in, and we'll go into Git. We'll do webhooks, and we're going to create a new webhook. We'll choose our project. Webhook Tech Field Day. We're going to choose our Git endpoint that we set up. So I did TFD demo. I could generate a token that would just bind the two together. I'm just going to leave that blank for this time. I could choose specific file names to monitor, but I'm not going to. Little Git knowledge for the people in the room. You want to do on pull request. You probably shouldn't do on push, or you're going to get a ton of commits. Conveniently enough, every one of my demos is on push because I don't listen to my own advice. Push will make it so anytime you push a new change into the repo, it updates. More commonly, the path you would take is on pull request, meaning somebody issued a PR to change. So for example, the website was broken. They issue a PR to fix it. I go in, I evaluate the code, I approve it. That merges in, and then the deployment happens. So I might push 10 times a day, but generally I'm only going to do a PR when something big happens. But I will do push anyways because, why wouldn't I? I've got my API token stashed away over here. And then I'm going to choose the pipeline that I'm going to work against. And since I already had a pipeline out there for the tech field day stuff, I got the tech field day web app. Looking good. Cool. I'm not going to do that. So that has created a webhook now. And now I have a binding set up between my GitHub repo and this actual pipeline. So when I commit a change to that pipeline, it will actually execute the build. So let's hop into our application and let's take a look around. Some of you may have been on Twitter earlier and seen a clever picture of Mr. Ken in the background that came up. As much of an opportunist as I am, I have committed a file called ken.jpg to this repository. We know that the previous application is kind of boring, and we sure would like to spiffy up our application a little bit. So we're going to hop in and we're going to actually update this application to put Ken front and center. So we're going to get into a little bit of web dev kind of stuff. So this is an Angular application. It's written in AngularJS 8. It uses Clarity UI as the framework for making it all pretty and fun. We have our application component here, and that's basically where the HTML of this lives. And let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger just for this run so we can actually see some things. We've got all of our code here. I'm going to find the line. We'll go ahead and change this from tech field day to Ken field day.
I like it.
You should. You absolutely should. And we are going to find, we have the tech field day logo. I believe I just named it ken.jpg. We're going to clear off a bunch of this. Actually, we'll just leave that alone. That's fine. So without going too deep into it, these are just the individual components inside of Clarity. These are that top card that existed. Below that is the 3 cards that were parallel or running across the horizon against each one of our application icons. But I've made those changes. Typically, I do this in VS Code. Just to be clear, you shouldn't edit your code in GitHub directly. That's bad. But I do it here because this entire demo has been based on things you shouldn't do that I do anyways, much like with my children. So I'm going to go ahead and do a commit now against that. And if I switch into code stream very quickly, we should see it starting to fire off in a moment here. This Wi-Fi is killing me. I actually think that I'm on VPN still, and that's actually why this is going so. So there we go. So that has picked up the change. You can see that it's on a push. It's against the TFD demo repository, master branch. I'm the owner, the webhook that's being fired, and the status. So we'll table that for a minute while it goes off and does its thing and prettifies our page with the glory of Ken. Meanwhile, I've done a couple of executions. You saw some stuff already in there. I have dashboards available for all of this. So I can actually get some good metrics out of how these executions are running and how things are happening in my environment. I had already deployed the web app earlier today. So we can see I failed quite a few times in the back of the room before I was actually successful. So I had 1 success before actually doing this demo and about 5 or 6 failures. But I have metrics around all of that, right? So I can see how long it took me to get to a recovered state, how long it typically takes the pipeline to run, how long it takes to fail. It usually fails immediately if it was going to fail at all. I can see details around each one of those failures. Most of these were from connectivity. Fun fact, my wife was very kindly sweeping my office and swept my network cord out of my server. Thanks, Shannon. So that's why those failures were there. My code is clean. It doesn't fail, typically. So I have these dashboards here to actually show me execution data around how the performance of the application is from a deployment standpoint. What's really powerful about this is you can use this same dashboarding, not just from an application context, but from the infrastructure context that I talked about before. If you want to see how often you fail at building a vSphere template, you could very easily build that pipeline, have it monitored in a dashboard, and be able to see your execution success around that. Something that could very easily be taken back and say, hey, look, I'm able to deliver 4 pipeline builds a month of my vSphere template. My stuff's clean. Going into the endpoints while we're waiting for that to finish kicking off, we can see the different endpoints that are supported. So we have things like Artifactory for storing like application objects, Bamboo for code testing. We have Docker. Docker lets us do the CI task. So if I want to do those image builds, or if I want to get really squirrely and just build straight bash file or bash scripts against deployments, I can do that. Grant and I, in some of our early prototyping, we actually pulled our Python SDK framework into the CI task and would execute Python calls directly from there to do API things across the platform. I can bind Docker registries, do email binding, which is kind of a silly one. Git integration, Jenkins, that's a very popular one, the ability to execute Jenkins jobs. If you're a customer who already has Jenkins in play, we're not telling you to rewrite all your stuff in the code stream format. We would much rather provide you an engine for consuming that. And we do that by having an integration there that lets you pull that in. Jira from a ticketing standpoint, Kubernetes, Team Foundation Server for the 4 of you that are still using TFS, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and then Orchestrator also. So if you have Orchestrator workflows, you can actually execute them as part of pipelines as well. CodeStream also has a variable store in it. So I publish my blog through CodeStream. So I have a blog, which I won't self-promote. But I store my AWS credentials in CodeStream here. And I use that as part of the pipeline. So when I commit my code in my pipeline or my GitHub repo, because I use Hugo for my blog. So when I commit that change to GitHub, CodeStream sees that and publishes my blog out. And similar, Alistair, to your question earlier, it actually uses AWS CLI to go out and clear my CloudFront CDN. Because if I don't clear that, I'm going to have my old blog up the whole time. So I store those variables in here. And I'm able to call them as part of those pipeline tasks. I talked a lot about the Git trigger so far and the idea of being able to trigger off of GitHub. But I can also, oh, look, our application's done. I can also trigger off of Gerrit code checks and Docker as well. So if I've bound to a Docker account, I can bind on push. So you saw my other pipeline where I had those 3 containers that it would build and push into the environment. I could very easily have that be the pipeline by itself and have a separate pipeline that triggers off of a Docker push that executes. Now, it's a little convoluted. I wouldn't recommend doing that. But the point is, if you have a process like Jenkins that already is building Docker images for you and pushing them into an environment, don't change. Use the automation you've already built and improve upon it with the tools that we have, in this case, binding to a Docker push. Who wants to see our glorious Ken?
A glorious leader.
A glorious leader. Please don't break. Please don't break. Oh. Why? So sad. It did break. Well, it didn't break. It just didn't finish. Not sure why that is. It should have actually accepted. We missed one important step. So that qualifies as a demo fail for everyone. For all the people watching at home, that was a demo fail. I have to change the input. So right now I have no input set. My input is just set as me running it natively. If I change this to Git, I now pull in all the information about Git as part of this execution. So I can bring all of those in. I can choose which ones I want to carry through the entire build. I'll save this. It's a good thing I still have 10 minutes left of this demo. We're going to see Ken's glorious picture on there. So help me. While that destroys, there's an important component here that you can't visually see from there, but if we go into the pipeline, you can see, and it's this concept of rollback pipelines. So funny story, we built this really cool pipeline platform, and people generally like CodeStream, and they like seeing this, but they had no way to back out their executions after they would run. So you would create these manual tasks where people would go in and if I half deployed a Kubernetes cluster and it failed midway through, I had no way to go in and back that out without logging into the Kubernetes cluster directly. We implemented this capability to fix things like that, and that's the idea of rollback pipelines. So I have a pipeline where if this fails during this stage, it will roll back that change. So this pipeline that rolls back just goes in and deletes the namespace. It deletes the old namespace, so I don't have any garbage left over, and I can start over clean. So that has finished. We'll make one more change to the application now. We'll go actually back and we'll change this to Clarity dark mode because they have a dark mode switch in there that will let us make a very easy change. So not only are we prettying it up with Ken, we're also becoming very trendy and using dark mode. So we'll scroll down here. We'll use Clarity UI. We'll switch this to dark. And we will push that out. And it's going to execute again. Takes about a minute to kick off, and that minute is intentional because it takes time for Git to synchronize its changes. Now I need you guys to give me a couple questions while that runs so that we can actually see this finish successfully. Questions about CodeStream?
Right at the beginning, when you started talking about CodeStream, you were talking about guys like me. Build the chunky PowerShell script to do the thing.
I didn't call it chunky, to be fair. Okay.
My words, not yours. But you cobble together a PowerShell script to do the things.
Absolutely.
Jumping to where you're doing this here is a pretty big leap. What's a method to start bridging that gap?
Totally. So, and this is, I do a lot of automation workshops. And the most common thing I get in those questions is, how do I automate? Sure, it sounds great. Where do I start? And it's always an interesting thing because a lot of people, when they're getting started with things, they see these tools, and I was the same way. I only got as good as I got with VRA because I had really great people to mentor me and show me how. And they showed me the tricks and how it actually works. Because in reality, I'll show you how easy it is to get started consuming those exact PowerShell scripts in a pipeline platform. So if I came in and I did a new pipeline with a blank canvas, we'll call it PowerShell just for grins. And I'll set this against Wi-Fi speed is just crippling today. The short answer is that CI task I showed you where I did the Docker build. So that actually runs a Docker container. So you could easily run the PowerShell Docker, like one of the PowerShell Docker containers or the PowerCLI ones, and it would drop you in, essentially, it would drop the container build into a PowerShell prompt. So you could natively come in, hit this task, do the CI task, and fill this in with PowerShell commands right there. You could copy and paste your script in there, and it would execute as part of that pipeline. So it'd be easy to take those and have them execute inside the pipeline running there. Now that's a little bit of a silly example because what I would think if someone told me that, I would be like, well, if I already have a full PowerShell script, I'm just going to run it locally. Most common PowerShell scripts are a massive thing with all of the tasks in there. And one of the kind of really good best practices about automation is breaking your stuff up into chunks. And if you have 5 or 6 chunks, I guarantee you're not going to be thrilled about running 5 or 6 individual PowerShell scripts. Right? The simple example there is break that up into logical chunks and have each one of those run as part of a task and pipeline that out so you can see when a component of that fails, how often it fails at that point, and then you know what to improve on. You know what part of this is fragile and might need some better error checking around it, or which part needs more verbose settings applied to it or something like that. That's where I would start. But as time moves forward, we see people getting, and it's not It's not a dig on PowerShell at all. We see REST APIs being more available and more readily available, and doing like an invoke web request inside of a PowerShell command feels really heavy at times to me. So using like the native REST capabilities and starting to take, once you have this built out as like the 6 steps of a PowerShell script running as a pipeline, start to look at where that gets more efficient, right? Because now it's a more manageable thing. Now you're not looking at this massive script and saying, okay, I need to modify lines 12 through 16 to improve it. Now it's, okay, I'm going to improve this part of the block of code and add on additional checks or grow this to a more complex thing. It's definitely not, I don't want to stand here in front of the room and say that this is the bulletproof, perfect use case for CodeStream. It's not. But when I look at, if you're already using CodeStream for all of the infrastructure provisioning capabilities, you have a tool there. And I'm a big fan of using tools that I have. If I have a tool, I want to see if I can use it because I'm already paying for it somehow, right? It's definitely a capability in the platform, and it's something we use internally quite a bit. If that's a bad answer, it's okay.
No, I had a follow-up that you can integrate PowerShell in there. Is PowerCLI already baked in, or is that kind of the need for PowerCLI negated by using the code stream?
No, so I would say, so in reality, what ends up happening is you're using it's spinning up a container in a Docker host. So you're going to use either a PowerCLI container that's going to execute those commands in that container, or you're going to spin up a PowerShell and install PowerCLI. You should use the PowerCLI container for that, most commonly. Think of it, anything you could run as a container, you would be able to execute through there. Sorry to interrupt, but I think please work. Oh, I think this one's going to fail universally, guys. It is. Well, we don't get to see Ken on the screen today.
Oh. So sad.
So sad. So sad.